My name is Jesse Singleton. I am the Assistant Director for Student Support with UTEP's Graduate School. Thank you to our folks who are joining us online and our folks who are joining us in person for our session today. It's good to see some folks and to be presenting to folks. We're here for the Conference Basics session. And we've actually got a really good number of folks online and a pretty good number of folks in person here attending. So there's definitely some interest on this. Also joining me in helping out staffing our digital space, Edgar Monroy is joining us. He's one of our graduate assistants, and he's helping answer questions, make sure that I'm not missing anything we go through, and make sure that the Zoom goes well in the digital space. Trying to make sure we provide this in as many ways as we possibly can for students so that you all can get the material you need. So if anyone else is attending today and hasn't yet made it, I'm sure they'll either join in through the back of the room or join in through the Zoom, and that's totally okay. But we do have a fair amount of content we're going to cover today. I want to make sure I'm getting to you and delivering for the session. As we go through, if you have questions about anything we're talking about, feel free to let me know. You can post that in the chat. I'll try to keep an eye on that and answer questions as we go. Or in the room, raise your hand, let me know. There's a portion at the end for any Q&A you might have, but you don't have to hold on to the questions. I don't mind pausing to answer a question or clarify something as we go through. Sound good? Good. Excellent. Thank you. All right, let's get right to it. If I can just get a verbal confirmation from Edgar or someone in our digital space, you can currently see the conference basics title slide and not something else. You see the correct slide?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you. Just want to make sure, assume that was okay, but let's make sure I'm not leaving people behind. So for today's workshop, we're going to cover a variety of different topics to help prepare you for the next conference you attend or your first conference you may attend. And a lot of things that folks have reported or shared in the past they find to be kind of the more intimidating aspects of attending a professional conference. That is knowing how to dress for success when you're at the conference. What should you wear? What does attire look like in a conference setting? And there are multiple engagement points during a conference. We're going to talk about how you break the ice with an elevator pitch and some other things that go along with that, going outside of just the elevator pitch, but how do you introduce yourself and how do you shake hands and how do you handle all of that? Because those things can be intimidating if you've never done it before, don't know how to do it properly. We're going to talk about how you can do group networking. So moving beyond the one-on-one to the group settings. Which is a whole different dynamic. And so if you are a social introvert like myself, some of those intimidating pieces is that group networking piece. We're going to talk about how you can do that successfully and hopefully bring that anxiety down a little bit. We'll give some tips on how to present, both for posters and academic talks. The positioning of this workshop just before our Grad Expo is not an accident. We do have our Grad Expo coming up on November 9th, and part of that is networking and poster presentation and things like that. So part of the reason we're doing this session now is if you're attending Grad Expo, get a little bit of advanced idea of how you can participate there. But that we're going to talk about those posters and academic talks a bit about how you can prepare for those. And then we're going to talk about how you select the sessions you attend when you go to a conference. Because that, again, can feel like it's a little bit overwhelming. There's too much to choose from and what do you do successfully. So these are our objectives today. Hopefully we're able to cover all of that and give you some good information. If we go through the session, you're hoping for something a bit different, please share that in the feedback and let me know so we can make updates or I can try to find you that resource and material. So if you're like, I was really hoping for something beyond this list, I'm happy to try to work and include that for you in the future. So jumping right into it. The first is how you're going to dress for the conference. And this feels kind of basic, but it actually goes pretty in depth when you start thinking about preparing and packing that suitcase, right? You have a limited amount of things you can bring, and knowing how you should dress for that conference may be a bit intimidating. So I have a couple of tips on how you navigate that. First, you need to consider that it's not just your presentation session that you need to have appropriate attire for. And what appropriate is going to change based on the situation. So thinking about when you are arriving to the conference for check-in. If you're flying or driving there, you're going to be traveling potentially for a long day. If you fly out of El Paso, there's almost no direct flights. Everything's a long day of travel. So we like to travel comfortably usually, right? But you have to think about what will I look like walking into the conference site, which is probably at a hotel, potentially. So how am I preparing for that environment, walking right in, checking in, and moving right to the check-in space? What do I look like as I'm departing from the conference? A lot of time conferences will have a last day that goes up through lunch, and then people are traveling. Usually that's after checkout. So what are you wearing on the day you leave that looks presentable, but also you're going to be in it all day? So suit and tie can be really difficult for that. You have to think about what conference socials might be and how you want to present yourself in that environment. Is that the same as presenting during the day? Probably not. You have your session days, which you can consider that's your more formal attire, right? Depending on the conference. Then the closing ceremony. What's the vibe in that space? That sometimes can be a little bit hard to determine. So what we want to think about is what is standard practice for your field at the conference or for that specific conference. I encourage you to talk with your mentor about that so that you know for this conference, this is usually what you'll see people attending in, right? There are some conferences where you're expected to be in business professional attire throughout the conference. There are other conferences where folks are going to dress down and they're going to be business casual, right? Normally they go to work and they're 9 to 5 during the week and they're in business professional. And when they attend the conference, they dress down a bit, but still business casual, because that's almost seen as that more informal networking space, that time out of the office, right? If you're wondering what's business casual is the polo and the slacks. For our folks in the room, you can see I'm currently wearing that. For folks online, I'm wearing a polo and slacks, what I wear every day is business casual, right? But you may also find conferences where they go more full casual. And that also may be dependent on your stature in that field, right? Your mentor may say, as a graduate student attending a conference, you want to put your attire a step above others at the conference. If you are 10 to 20 years in the field, maybe you roll up to the conference and you're in a sweatshirt from your institution you work at and jeans, but you have the credibility to do that, right? The social capital to be in that attire, right? So have that conversation with your mentor and figure out what is appropriate, right? My recommendation for arrival and departure, rep your institution or rep your field in some way, right? And so if you can have a UTEP shirt or a sweatshirt, that's recommended, right? Generally, jeans or shorts are going to be okay for check-in, right? We know you're coming from travel. Tennis shoes are okay. You don't have to be in business professional, business casual for your check-in at the hotel or your arrival, right? They're expecting you to be coming in. But it's good for folks to be able to identify and see who you are. And so having something from your institution, or if you're a member of a professional organization that has some swag or something like that, you probably want to put that on. Helps you identify yourself. Similar for the closing ceremonies, oftentimes closing ceremony is the more dressed down day. You see a lot of folks that will attend that, they'll be in jeans and a sweatshirt, because again, they recognize people are traveling. And again, usually they're repping their institution or an organization through that. So you can quickly identify folks as you're going through, right? Again, find out from your conference specifically what works. But general guidance on those two things is going to be, it's a bit more casual in environment. For your conference socials, that is what I would describe as snappy casual, right? That is not necessarily the sweatshirt. It's a nice, maybe button-down shirt or so a nice shirt of some kind, more of slacks. For our ladies, a skirt, maybe potentially if you prefer that, right? But you're doing what's called snappy casual, right? It's not your everyday attire that you would wear going to class. It's something you'd wear going out to a nice dinner and see what you present in that environment. But you're not necessarily wearing business casual to the evening socials. You're not wearing obviously a suit and tie typically. Session days is where you're going to be a business casual or above. If you're presenting, you likely want to go to the business professional side so that you are giving that best professional face. Make sense? So what this would look like is some, well, we'll go through the entire diagrams, but here's some examples of what looks like from a business professional versus a completely casual mindset. And when in doubt, if you're not sure, always elevate your dress. So if you're like, I'm not sure if attending the closing ceremony is casual, business casual, professional, go with business casual with the least, right? Yes.
Are we going to give these slides after the session?
So I am recording the session and I will post it later. So you guys can always access the recording. Yep. But, and if you like these diagrams, anytime if you just Google business casual versus, or business professional versus casual, you'll find a lot of great diagrams and things like this that you'll find. There's some actually on the UTEP website and the Career Center. And so I'm happy to share these. I'm recording it, but you can find some of these diagrams for using as well. We provide really good guidance on this. This is good for conferences, interviews, professional presentations. This is generally good guidance, right? And so you need to find your own style within these kind of guidelines. If you find these very restrictive, I apologize. I agree. I wish we could all kind of come to a space where we recognize that not everyone can afford a suit and tie, right? Especially when they're young and it's just starting out, right? But these are the professional standards, right? And so be ready for that. I will also share that the Career Center does have a career closet. And so if you need professional attire for a conference, you can rent that. And so that is an option. So that's a bit about dress, right? Which again, if you think about you're preparing, your first thoughts are getting my presentation accepted, getting some funding from the travel grant to be able to cover my conference, having everything on point, knowing who I'm going to talk to. You don't always think about what you're going to wear while you're there. I mean, the last thing you think about when you're throwing everything in your suitcase. I encourage you to think about it a little bit in advance, but don't stress about it. Just plan ahead. The next piece is, okay, now you have to network with folks. You'll likely have to deal with the networking piece before you'll ever have to deal with the presentation piece, because you're going to arrive and you're going to have to network with people who are at the check-in station, right? You're going to arrive and have to talk to people around the lobby of wherever the conference is being held. You're going to arrive and there's going to be probably an evening session of some kind that's a social, because the conference doesn't start till the next day. There's a lot of networking you're already going to have to do before you even start the presentation. So let's start there at the networking piece. How do we prepare for that? And some of that's going to be one-on-one and some of that's in a group. And so you want to have some things ready to go and feel prepared for networking, but also know that if we're introverts, we can network for a while and we can go away. We don't have to devote 100% of our energy, 100% of the time to the networking piece if it's not where we're most comfortable. You're going to find that a lot of folks are not super excited about the concept of networking, or aren't going to want to network the 100% of the time. And so there are folks that are going to take breaks. So if that's you, don't feel like that makes you unusual or not suited to conferences. That's 50% of the population, right? So don't worry about that. How do we do that networking? The first thing I want you to think about is preparing, what is your elevator pitch, right? When in doubt and you need to talk with someone, you need to have that elevator pitch about you ready to go, so you have something to talk about, right? You're going to an academic conference, you're already kind of in this mindset, you're there to share work, so figure out what this is. The elevator pitch essentially is that 30-second commercial about you, what you're doing, what you're researching, what your main focus of interest is, how you can be impactful, right? Now, folks don't want to hear your elevator pitch 100% of the time because you're not always selling, but you want to have this ready so you have a go-to to talk about, right? So when you do that, you are really doing a brief introduction that shares who you are, what you do, what you're interested in, and how you add value in any context, right? Why are you all having that conversation? What's your value add to the conversation there, right? And if you're not quite sure the answer to all of those questions, that's why I encourage you to sit down and write this out. Think about it. Have this prepared in advance. Again, if you're nervous about networking and you're not great on the fly, having this even ready, you don't bring note cards and do your networking with a note card in front of you and say, let me tell you how I value in this context. It's not going to go well, right? But having it written down in advance and kind of reading through it and kind of feeling comfortable with that is going to help you feel more natural in the moment. So take the time to do that. It feels a little weird, but go ahead and do it. You want to make sure you're maintaining poised, polished, prepared, passionate, and professional, right? All of our P's as you're preparing this elevator speech. Make sense? So again, this is where the idea of the elevator speech is that you have like 30 seconds, you get in an elevator, and the keynote speaker is in the elevator. And you really want to meet the keynote speaker, and you really want to connect with them on LinkedIn because you really appreciated what they talked about, and you want to make a professional connection. You have 30 seconds in that elevator to make an impact and try to get a business card or get a LinkedIn contact. So who are you? What do you do? What are you interested in? How do you add value to that context, right? Because the keynote speaker is going to get a lot of people asking them for their LinkedIn or their business card or stuff like that. They're the keynote. This is your chance. If you're prepared, you have a better opportunity of making that connection. So we think about this from an interview context, but again, when you might need this is during interview, when they tell you about, please tell us about yourself, right? And this may be something where you walk in and it may feel a bit like an interview. You walk into the conference space and someone says, oh, tell me about yourself. What are you working on, right? Oh, crap. Everything I've just forgotten about what I do in my research, right? Used for academic professional conferences, career fairs, meetings, or calling an employer about a position. So you're doing a cold call, right? All these things are an opportunity where an elevator pitch is going to come in handy, right? And so we're in the conference mindset, but all of these things will help you if you have this elevator pitch practiced and ready to go. Okay. Beyond the elevator pitch, that's like the content, right? You also know how you're going to introduce yourself at any given moment when you're walking up and talking to folks. And you want to be memorable, but not for the wrong reasons when you introduce yourself. And so you need to work on and think about, how do I go about introducing myself? And I like the Inigo Montoya method that I found for making introductions, right? If you don't know who Inigo Montoya is, from The Princess Bride, great movie from the 80s. I'll show you a picture of it in a minute. But what you're going to do in this method is you're going to offer a polite greeting, right? You're going to give your name, which makes sense. You're going to establish a relevant personal link. Why are you having the introduction in the first place? And then you're going to manage expectations in the interaction, right? What this looks like in practice is, for Inigo, hello, my name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die. Right? The six-fingered man killed his father at the beginning of the movie, right? It's his mantra over and over again. Hello, my name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die. Introduction, polite greeting, gives his name, establishes a personal relevant link. Killed my father. Manages expectations. Prepare to die, right? But you have to think about, okay, so what am I doing here, right? So if I were practicing this with all of you, I would say, hello, my name is Jesse Singleton. I'm your assistant director for student support with the graduate school. I'm here to talk to you about conference basics today. Right? I did all the things that I need to do in that greeting, so you know who I am and what I'm going and bringing us forward in the conversation. Then I can go right into my elevator pitch or my presentation, right? Because you might want to have this when you stand up there to do your poster or do your academic talk, or you walk up to greet somebody and you're breaking that contact, right? Another way to think about this, I feel like the managed expectation piece is kind of weird, right? I'm trying to figure out how I do that on the fly. You can also practice it a bit different way, where you offer a polite greeting, you articulate your passions, and then you share why you're here, right? It's the same kind of flow. And I encourage you, again, it feels weird sometimes that you practice these things, but practice this. Practice in the mirror, practice with your friends. Get ready for this, because you're going to have to do an introduction over and over and over again. What does that look like for you in a way that is genuine and builds a connection with people? Remembered for the right reasons, right? And sometimes I found that the way to go about this and be memorable is to take a situation like this and then pull back the curtain on why it's a bit awkward, right? Do your introduction and say, yeah, I actually been practicing the Inigo Montoya method of introductions, right? And explain all this to somebody. They're going to remember that, right? It's interesting. Oh, it's like you're breaking the ice a bit by talking about how awkward this kind of is, and that we practice introductions and the whole method for it, right? Don't be afraid to do some of those things. It's okay. After you introduce, there's things that come after that. But you can't just say like, I'm here to talk to you about your session. And then what, right? You have to prepare for what you're going to say next. And so there's a couple things you want to think about. And again, you might go ahead and write this down out if you have high value targets that you want to make sure you make networking connections with, right? If you review the conference presentation planner and you were really excited about the keynote, you want to make sure you talk to that person, you might want to actually write out or practice out some of these questions, right? If you want to make sure you meet a certain presenter or the person who is running the conference or the organization president, something like that, you can practice some of this and have these answers ready to go. So make sure you're preparing who your audience is and why you're interested in the institution or the company, right? Why am I going up and talking to you? Prepare that in advance, right? What are your key strengths? What do you want to exemplify? What do you want to talk about without making it seem like you're being kind of grandiose? What adjectives describe you best? Good thing to think about also for putting into your resume, right? Figure that out. What do you want us to know about you? And know about you is not know about your research, right? Your research is a part of you, but you are not your research, right? So think of some things, right? Or how you're articulating that well. Figure out what your maybe a career goal. Where direction are you kind of heading? Especially if you're knowing that you want to talk to Potentially you go to a conference and there are academics there, and there are also vendors or there are other professional companies that may be hiring in the future, things like that, attending, seeing as a talent search. So you know what your goal is, that you can walk up and talk to that specific company. And your goal can't just be, I need a job somewhere. Anywhere will do. Can you hire me, please? Right? That's not going to make them feel special, right? So you got to think about that. How can you immediately benefit the person or the project, the institution, the company? Why, again, you value added in that conversation? Why should they connect with you on LinkedIn? And what should they do as a result with their listening to your conversation and talking to you, hear this whole elevator speech? What are you wanting to get out of this, right? Is it you're hoping that they'll grab coffee with you later to talk more? Are you hoping they'll add you on LinkedIn or open yours? Are you just wanting a business card? If the only goal is to build connection and network and have a conversation, do you want to know more about their session? Do you feel like they would benefit by coming to your session? And you want to talk to them about that and say, I appreciated your session on blank, blank, blank. I think that you might find this interesting in mine if you'd like to attend later. Right? What do you want them to do? Also think about what's your hook? What gets them to want to talk to you more? Think about what is your unique skill set, what's your unique experience, and then make sure you have eye contact as you're having conversations, where appropriate, right? Eye contact should be consistent, but also not staring directly at some folks. And knowing that in certain cultural contexts, sustained eye contact is not going to be appropriate, right? And so think about some of those things. But in general, you do want to maintain some eye contact, right? If you're talking through a networking thing and someone's constantly elsewhere, they're not paying attention to you. You also need to think about what are the nonverbal cues that the conversation isn't an end, right? These short, informal networking conversations are not meant to last 10, 20 minutes. After a while, you both may be looking for the exit. And that's okay, right? So know when that conversation is like, hey, can I get a business card? Hey, can I add you on LinkedIn? It's been great talking with you. You're at a social, like, it's been great talking. I'm going to go grab a beverage. Right? I'm going to go hit the snap table. I need to take a bit of a break and go decompress for a while. I'm going to go take a quick walk, right? Find your comfortable way of exiting a conversation and recognize when they may also be looking at the conversation, right? Because you don't want to hold somebody kind of locked into a position, right? Have those things kind of ready in advance. Think about that. A couple more tips. When you're writing out that elevator speech, cut the fluff. Again, it's 30 seconds. Keep it interesting. What makes you unique? Why do they want to talk to you? You need to be yourself. If you go out there and you're trying to essentially emulate another person's communication style, it's going to feel forced. It's going to feel rigid. Find ways to be genuinely you and don't feel over-rehearsed. So you need to rehearse, but don't feel like, again, you're reading from note cards that seem to be hidden from view. Think about how often you include acronyms or jargon into the conversation. Even when you're at an academic conference where everyone else should be a professional in your field, you should not assume that they're going to know everything that you know and that jargon and acronyms will be fully understood. I actually had a conversation with this actually just yesterday, walking with Dean Kreitz and our Associate Dean, Lucia, who were talking about actually reviewing writing and having things that are in their field that they still didn't quite understand because it was so jargon heavy, right? And so that can happen. So don't assume that folks are going to know everything you're talking about. Try to bring that down, that dialogue down to a more understandable level. Because you don't have that poster right there with you to reference. Remember, to close with any next steps, if you have it, if you want a business card, get it. If you want to add them on LinkedIn, get it. Whatever it is you want to do, make sure you do that. And if you are collecting business cards, one of my personal tips is to take a moment after an interaction and write down a couple words or a sentence or a phrase or a conversation topic or an after action that came from that conversation. That will help you remember a week from now, when you get back and you're going through all your business cards and figure out who you're making connections with, you'll remember who they are and why you talk to them. Now, what you don't want to do is like have a conversation, finish it, and then turn right around to a table while they're standing there and write down notes on their business card. It seems a little weird, right? So maybe try to remember in the evening, go through your stack of business cards and make some notes, right? Maybe bend the edge on one if you want on a corner, if you're like, I need to make sure I contact this person earlier. Do some things to give yourself some visual cues and some reminders, right? So you know what's going on. What you can also do, the flip side of that, is making notes on your own business card if you have them about the conversation and giving them to the person, right? When they operate, like you have that conversation, they have a really great topic of conversation, and you want to just like, it was really great talking to you. We should really connect on LinkedIn. Oh yeah, we should. Yeah, great. Here's my business card. And then we talked about desalination of water molecules. Hand to them, right? If you put that note out there, it's not, but if you take it and kind of write, it's a little bit weird, right? But that adds a little bit of personal interaction to it. You could consider doing that, right? Make sense? Excellent. Last piece on the one-on-one interactions is about handshakes. Again, you'd be surprised how often folks have never been taught how to shake hands or how to handle that appropriately. I remember vividly from being a young man, I used to be a wrestler, actually still a wrestler, and the heavyweight for our wrestling team had the weakest handshake I've ever seen in my life. He would literally put his hand out there and then wouldn't close it at all and just shake his fingers at you when you shook his hand. And it was just so weird that such a large individual had such a weak handshake. And as he was getting ready to graduate high school, my dad really took him aside and said, "This is unacceptable, and I have to teach you this." And it's fixed, right? But it's a weird thing of like sometimes folks never get that mentorship of understanding how you shake hands. If you've ever shook hands with someone where they didn't have a good handshake, it gets weird really fast. And so we have to know how we do that. So it's not overly complicated, but when you shake hands, you reach forward. You're not jabbing your hand forward, but you reach forward. You touch thumb to thumb with the web of your hand, fully engages. Then you grasp firmly, but you don't squeeze their hand. Keep eye contact throughout. And you have 1 or 2 pumps up and down, and then you disengage, right? You don't extend your finger past onto their palm, onto their wrist, like you're checking their pulse. That's weird. You don't grab their fingers, right? This is where when you reach forward, engage, make sure you have the webbing touching in the thumb, because that's how you make sure you fully engage with the palm. And then you're just shaking hands, right? You're not yanking them towards you, as some very famous political figures who don't know how to shake hands will do. It's just a polite greeting, right? We're not trying to hurt anybody's hand. We're not trying to yank them off balance. We're just shaking hands. But you need to practice that. If you're like, I've not shaken a lot of hands recently, I've never really practiced this. Practice with some folks, right? Make sure that you're doing it correctly so that when you get a situation, you're ready for it, right? So that you can shake hands and not be the one that everyone remembers again for the wrong reason. Now, shaking hands also goes with a big caveat that if you're not comfortable shaking hands, you don't have to. Now, with COVID, the practice of not shaking hands has become more acceptable. It used to be something where if you weren't comfortable shaking hands, people would kind of look at you a bit differently in the interaction, and it was a bit off-putting. Now, it's much more common. And a way to go about this is actually to acknowledge that you're not shaking hands because of COVID, right? So if you let that be known out there, folks will not look at you differently. 9 times out of 10. And so it's okay if you don't want to shake hands. But I have some good alternatives for you if you don't want to shake hands and you can practice. So there is the fist bump, which again, prior to COVID would have been seen as much too informal, right? But now is a common business practice because the fist bump is much less likely to transmit germs, right? It's not no contact, but it's not as much contact. So the fist bump, even better than that, as far as not likely to spread disease, is the elbow bump, right? I found the elbow bump works best when you make kind of a joke about it of like, yep, we're not supposed to shake hands anymore. Now I got to do the elbow bump, right? And people will elbow bump with you. That's entirely okay. It's falling a little bit less out of favor because things are returning a bit more closer to normal, even though things aren't normal yet, right? The other option is if you don't want to shake hands at all, you don't want the contact. I found a really effective greeting is when instead of shaking hands, you essentially take your hand that you would normally shake with, and as you walk up to the individual to make the conversation, the interaction, place your hand over your heart and you introduce yourself, right? And so essentially you're taking what would be a shaking hand and you're gesturing that this is me. Place your hand to your chest. This is a verbal or a visual cue, a nonverbal, to the person that you're not shaking hands, and that's okay. And so that's a really good one. If you're like, I'm not comfortable shaking hands, I don't really want to do that for code reasons, or you just don't like to shake hands, that's entirely okay. But there are other ways that you can go about this that are acceptable in an academic and a professional context. All right, going out of the individual networking to talk about group networking. Again, there's a whole different level of anxiety for folks. Some folks, the one-on-one is the most anxiety-rating thing. Other folks is how do you walk to the social, where you walk essentially into maybe a courtyard where there may be some beverages and some appetizers set up, and everyone seems to already know each other. What do? How do you break into a conversation, right? The tips on how you have the conversation are not fundamentally different. All the things about elevator pitches and greetings and handshakes, all those things apply. But how you break into the conversation is going to feel a bit different. And I also encourage you to think about how you maintain conversation across that group. So what you want to look for is an open conversation group, a crescent. And I also encourage you to make crescents as opposed to closed groups. So this is really simple. When you're engaging in a group conversation, maybe it's between the sessions, it's at a social, it's somewhere else, right? You want to avoid having something where you are boxed in with somebody. In a one-on-one situation, that's both standing in front of each other, directly looking at each other, right? That's a one-to-one interaction. And in a social setting where you're doing group networking and group conversation, folks, unless they know one of the individuals in that, are not likely to walk up and join that conversation because it's closed. Now, if you want a closed conversation, you can do that. Point your feet at the person and look at them, right? But that's going to promote a closed conversation. All you have to do to open this up is turn your feet and have your shoulder and be looking at them, but have your feet pointing at an angle and your shoulder open. This opens the conversation that basically states, come join us if you want to talk, right? When you have a group of 3 or 4, it looks even more like a crescent. And so I'd encourage you to do is you join groups. Instead of being, say you have a group of 3 people standing there, instead of being the person that comes in and closes the group, you add to the crescent, right? If you find yourself in a group of 2, someone comes up and joins, make sure you're always standing in a crescent. Be the person that kind of helps move the group that way. It promotes people to come in and talk to you. And as you're having a conversation in the social, people are going to drop in and out of conversation. So you want it to be a space where people can freely come and go. That way you keep talking and networking. As you're finding who to talk to, look for the folks that have these open group dynamics so you can join them. Make sense? If you walk up and you don't see the open groups, look for folks that are standing in a more central social location, but they're by themselves. And go talk to them and start the introduction. What is happening there is that person wants to be in a conversation. They are having a struggling moment of breaking into a conversation or having kind of the courage to go up and start the interaction. And so they place themselves in a high traffic area, hoping someone will come and talk to them, right? So go be that person. Even if it's not the most comfortable for us, right? Know that this person actually wants to talk to somebody. Now, some conferences will do this better than others, where they'll have maybe again beverages set up, they'll have some appetizers. I've seen some where they do an outdoor courtyard and they have got all that, and they also set up like Jenga or like board games and like drop and go games. Those are great for just people that can walk in and you immediately have something to talk about, right? Not every conference is going to do that, but look for those spaces where you might have something you can talk about, right? And seek out those individuals that are kind of looking for a conversation. Now, where you have the folks that are on the very edges or kind of away from the group, they're not likely looking for a conversation, right? And so they're not necessarily the ones that you're going to approach unless you know them, there's a specific reason you're looking to approach them. And again, try to judge by their body language. Are they taking a break from the conversation or are they looking to engage in conversation? So read the body language as best you can and make those determinations. If you find that someone you're really wanting to talk to, that's on your list of people to talk to and network with, is at the far peripheries of the social, probably not the best time to address and come in and talk to them. They might be ready for that conversation. Again, they might have just gotten out of 3 or 4 long conversations where people had asks. They wanted to connect. They wanted something, right? And now they're disengaging from that. Give them a moment. Wait till they float back in. Find them in a crescent, right? Or find them when they're more in the group. Make sense? Excellent. All right, so we've figured out what we're going to wear. We figure out who we're going to talk to and how we're going to go about that. Now we got to think about how are we going to present. So what do we do when we get there? And this is actually where it should get a little bit more comfortable, right? Because you're going to move out of what may be not your area of expertise. And now you get to focus on what is your expertise. If you're there to present a poster or an academic talk, it's something you are the expert on, and so you can command the room. So the first tip before we even get into the actual tips is remember, you're the expert in that session. You're presenting, and use that to inspire your own confidence to lead that session. So things you want to do for posters, make sure you are reading it well in advance so you know what you need to do for that session. Read all the instructions they send you, read them carefully, read them a couple of times before you prepare anything. It's easy to miss a detail, right? So you need to know what's the maximum size of your poster, right? Where do you set up your poster? When do you get to set it up? If there are multiple sessions throughout the day, when can you access that space? You know all that in advance. How long do you need to be by your poster? Can you network during that session? So you need to have all those things kind of read through, memorized, ready to go. So prepare for that in advance so you ease the anxiety of already knowing what you need to do. Know all your materials, know what your goals are, know the audience that may be coming in to talk to you. It's not a bad idea to have like a one-page summary. So take the content from your poster. You can't just shrink it down to one, take the image and just put it on a page and hand it out. But maybe you have some salient points, things you may want to give to someone as a walking away kind of thing. That also has your contact information on it, right? Not everybody gets the one sheet page, right? But when you have that interaction with someone, they come in, they engage with your poster, they have a long conversation with you, they're really interested about it, they have something that they can also offer you. Maybe you want to give them something to remember the conversation that includes your contact information. It's almost like a resume for your poster. So think about that. Make sure to include your contact info. Otherwise, it's just a piece of paper they're going to lose and not who it goes to. Consider business cards. If you don't have them, you can make them. You can do that from your home printer. You can have them made. It is a bit of an extra expense, but they're not overly expensive. And it's a good thing to have. Again, if you want people to remember you or have something that'll take away with your name and contact info on it, business card is going to accomplish that the easiest. And so if you're not at a point where you have them already, not a bad idea to have some to take with you. And always carry them with you as you're going through. My jacket over here, I have business cards in the chest pocket, just in case someone asks me a question and need a business card, I've always got them on. So always try to make sure you got business cards on. And then make sure you're reviewing, again, what are your professional goals for that conference? So you can articulate those when people ask. Why are you there? Make sure your elevator speech is ready, because they're not just going to ask you questions about your poster. They're going to want to know about you. And so be ready to get the elevator pitch. And then again, think about who you need to meet. Because when you attend a conference, you should be able to identify who are the folks that I want to make sure I connect with. Because conferences are about building your network. And so it's not just randomly, their session was good, and I kind of like this person, and I guess I'll try to speak to the keynote person. Go through in advance and figure out this person is a rock star in my field, and I gotta talk to them at some point, right? Put them on your list. So know who you want to talk to. If you see them, try to make the connection. As far as how you're creating your posters, there's a lot more information on this if you want to watch the Grad Expo and 3MT info session that we have online on our workshops and events page. But just some quick tips if you're presenting a poster at an academic conference. Make sure you have a clear and descriptive title. That needs to be visible from a good distance away. If it's too small, people are going to walk right past it. So make sure it's a good title, it's clear, it's descriptive, it's readable from about 10 feet away. Ensure any text you have is legible. And that can be a little bit smaller as you walk up to the poster. But think about highlights and points that you want to make sure are a bit larger, people can see as they walk past at about a 5-foot distance. If you have any figures on there, make sure they are labeled clearly so folks can identify them. And then make sure your background is plain. It doesn't have to be stark white, but you don't want over the amount of images or movement kind of in the background, because that's going to detract from the information. And you want the layout to be simple so that folks can follow it. The idea is that you want people to be able to read it from a distance and decide if they're going to come up and talk to you about it. If you're in a presentation hall of posters, folks are going to walk 5 to 10 feet away from all the posters and look at them as they go and determine which one are they making a stop at based on their level of interest. They will not stop typically unless they are a social butterfly at every poster. So how do you get them to come in and talk to you about yours, right? That's the goal. If it's not readable from a distance, they're not going to come talk to you about it. If there's no title they can easily discern as they're walking past to know what it's about, they're not going to come and talk to you. So make sure they can read it. They're going to want to do that. And engage passerby, right? If someone comes through and they kind of pause for a second, showing an appetizer, engage with them. Say hello, introduce yourself, ask them if they have questions. Point out something on your poster that they may want to engage with, because then they'll walk up and they'll talk to you about it. If you say hello to someone and ask them if they have questions, or point out something on their poster, your poster, that you think, hey, this is actually a really interesting point. If you're looking, at my poster. Again, only the rudest conference session or conference attendee is going to just look at you and then keep going while they eat their meatball, right? They're not going to do that. They're going to talk to you, right? But they also may be awkward about coming up and talking to you about it, and they're going to want you to break the ice. You're the presenter at that point, so own that, say hello, right? Anybody that pauses and makes eye contact, they get a hello. You also want to kind of think about your poster of, can it stand on its own? Not literally, because you don't want it to fall over. Make sure you set it up well. But if you walk away to go grab an appetizer or a beverage, or you see somebody that you want to network really, really quickly, or you notice a poster you wanted to talk to somebody about, and you want to take a 5-minute break to go talk to someone about their poster, can someone walk past your poster and get a reasonable idea of what you're trying to convey? It should be able to stand on its own. You're there to provide the additional context and discussion and answer questions and tell about you, but your poster should tell your story without you there. Think about that. If you're going to do an academic talk, you're presenting a session, you maybe have 15, 20 minutes, an hour, 15 minutes to do that presentation. That's a bit different than preparing for a poster session, because a poster you maybe have 2 or 3 minutes, but you're probably there for about an hour doing these 2 and 3 minute interactions, right? This is a bit different. All the same rules of preparation still apply, making sure you know where you need to be, when you need to be there, how long your presentation is. Will there be somebody in the room that is helping keep time for you? Are they handing out evaluation sheets? Know everything you need to know so you feel really prepared, so nothing is guesswork when you go in. Try to arrive to your session a bit early so you're not walking in as it starts. You never know what is going to happen when you walk into that space, and if you'll need to reset the room or if there'll be technological issues. As an example, for our session today, I arrived at 2:30 to check the room. It took them a little bit longer than normal to unlock the door. When I arrived into the space, all of the connectors that are usually in the room for me to connect my device to the presentation screen were not in the room. I went to 3 different offices looking for those cords, and no one knew where they were. And so I managed to get tech support to give me a couple different sets of cords and got them to work. There was also an issue getting the Zoom all set up and everybody into it, right? So it took me a full half hour to make sure we were ready for our session today. Unexpected things that if I showed up at 2:55 expecting the room to be set up the way it always is, everything to be there, everything to go smoothly, we would have started 15 minutes later. So don't come 5 minutes before your session and expect everything to go perfectly. There's probably a session before yours, so you can't barge in, but try to get there as early as you can. Make sure the room's to your liking. Make sure you avoid technological issues, because if you start 10, 15 minutes late, people are going to leave your session and go somewhere else. So be prepared. As far as your actual talk, make sure you have clear goals and a structure for your talk, and outline that at the beginning. I told you all today what we're doing is our goals. This is what we're covering, right? So have that ready to go. You don't want to just jump right in. Make sure you have goals of what you want to do. Make sure you tell them what it's about. Vary your tone and pitch as you go through. If you're reading very monotonely as you go through the presentation and you don't vary your tone or your pitch at all, it's going to be very easy for people to fall asleep through your presentation and no one's going to want to listen to you. Don't do that. So have some movement about the space as you can. Vary your tone and pitch. Work on your presentation style, right? What feels natural for you? Body language is important as you go through. Again, figure out how you gesture, how you move about the space, and what, again, feels natural. You want to avoid too much movement. And so you shouldn't feel like you're bouncing back and forth. from foot to foot as you have a conversation, right? A little bit of movement is good. Too much movement is distracting. Also think about where you're actually at in the space. I'm going to go ahead and reference other sessions and promote those in the TARAGA Foundation section of our workshop page. In our TA Pedagogy workshop recording, at the end, I talk about presenting and how to move around the room in classroom management. It also applies to presentations, right? And so you may want to move a little bit about the room so that it helps vary who's engaged and keep people from kind of zoning out. Now for our session today, I'm staying near the front because I'm recording the session and I want the folks online to be able to hear that well and be able to hear what we're talking about. And so also know your limitations. Are you recording? Is there a space you have to stay in? How do you utilize that? Or do you have a clicker and you can walk and present from the back of the room for a little bit and then walk to the front so it feels like the whole room is engaged? Think about that and think about how you want to use that space. You're not required to be chained to the front unless there's a reason you're chained to the front. Again, be respectful and responsive to your audience and your colleagues, right? You may want to let folks know whether there's a Q&A at the end or if you're open to answering questions as you go through. If someone raises a their hand for a question, you're not prepared for it, acknowledging and letting them know there's questions at the end potentially, or answering the question right there. Think again, what is your style and what are you comfortable with, and make those expectations clear with folks as you go through. But be respectful in that, knowing that not everybody is a respectful communicator, and you want to be the most respectful communicator in the room because you're presenting, right? So if they're not going to be respectful, you're going to go ahead and do that. You're going to show them how it's done. And then remember your Q&A space, it's a space for dialogue, right? And so you may get questions that feel very challenging. And not challenging and then tough to answer, more of like, I'm challenging your idea, right? And they may even tell you, I'm going to challenge you on that. It's a really interesting phrase to use when you're asking a question, right? Try to look at it as a space of dialogue. Again, if they're not being as respectful in the room, be the most respectful person in the room and see it as a space to create dialogue as opposed to shut it down, right? As best you can. And then I describe those folks that are a bit more antagonistic or more challenging, almost as like the academic heckler, right? How are you going to address that? How are you going to handle it? Be ready for that. Hopefully it doesn't happen. It shouldn't happen. We should all be nice to each other. But you might find some folks that have very strong opinions. And so how are you going to manage that and have that conversation, right? Well, showing them respect. Because when you show them a lot of respect, but then talk around the issue and resolve it, you make them look like the fool in the room. All right, so we've talked about what we're wearing when we get there and how that all works, how we're meeting people, how we're managing all our session that we're presenting. The other big elephant in the room is, how do you decide what you're going to do while you're there, right? Conferences often have a lot of sessions going on at once, and you can't be everywhere all at once. And it can be really daunting to pick the right things. And it can also be really easy to pick kind of really quickly and then kind of have some buyer's remorse as you attend a session and it's not quite what you expected, but then you hear rave reviews about a different session. It happens to all of us, and it's going to happen. So you're just going to make your peace with that, but do your best to pick sessions that'll be interesting for you. I have some advice for that. So first is make sure you review the conference guide in advance, if there is one, right? Usually there is, but if not, you're going to have to pick on the fly. But if you got a conference app or a PDF, something that tells you the sessions and the layout in advance, review that in advance. And then look for updates the night before just in case they change sessions. Don't wait till the morning of and try to rush through and pick your sessions. Give yourself some time because you may want to research some things. Figure out, is there a conference app that you can download? If there is, download it. Go through it. It's usually where most of the information is located. And it's also where you can interact usually with other conference goers and get updates on the fly, right? They also have some, usually they have some interactive features too that helps ease your way through finding where you need to go. Is there a way that you can then use that app, if there is one, to create yourself an itinerary? This is great for keeping track of things and not losing it. So if they have that conference app and you click on a session and say, add to my schedule, boom, it's right there. And so you know where you're going and where you need to be. You can also look to see if they have tracks, right? And so they may have a graduate track or early professional track, right? Or a research methods track or something that moves you through to say that these 6 sessions all fit this track. You don't have to attend all those sessions and follow that track, but if that's an area of interest for you, it can help guide you through and see where they connect, right? And so maybe you follow that track, or maybe you pick 3 of the 5 off that track. So look for that information. When you're looking at the sessions and you're trying to pick which ones you're going to, seek out the topics that interest you where you have less knowledge, right? So this is from a growth mindset. That's interesting to me and I don't know a lot about it. That seems really simple on the surface, but our human nature is that sometimes we'll pick the things that we have greater knowledge so we are comfortable in the session. Attending a conference and going to a session is not about necessarily being comfortable in the session, it is learning and growing. So pick the things you know less about. Be willing to pick something you're like, I don't know anything about that. Go find out. It's one session. If it's a dud, it doesn't help you, it's 1 hour. It's okay. Happens, right? But be willing to go out there on a limb on something. Again, looking in advance, so you can do this. Look at the presenters. Look them up. Are they someone that's an expert in the field? Right? Are they a published author? What do they bring to the table that means you want to hear about what they have to say, right? If the presentation topic looks interesting, but the person has no expertise there, are they the best person to talk to you about it? Or you go through and you're like, the abstract for the session is not that engaging, but this person is someone I want to know. Or I know this person does outstanding work. Maybe they didn't do a good job of putting together their abstract, but their session could be dynamite, right? So know about the presenter behind it. Generally, think about avoiding sessions that you yourself could present. And so you look through and it's like, this is highly related to what I do. And I could probably actually give that session. Probably not one you need to attend then, unless you were looking for a new approach or more context, right? So, using an example for myself, attending conferences, I went to a graduate career development type of conference for professionals that practice that. And I specifically attended sessions on professional development sessions, right? How to organize those, what topics are trending. I could give a presentation in that environment, but I want to know what other people in my area were doing for things that I'm not doing, right? Pick up tips, right? Also make sure that a session fulfills either a knowledge goal or a networking goal, right? I don't know about that, or I need to meet that person, right? If neither of those things are true, then it's not the session for you. Unless it's like, that's my colleague and friend, and I want to make sure they have people in the room. I'm going to go support them. That's okay too. What will also happen a lot is you'll go through the session and you'll find out that, man, session 3 of the day has 3 different sessions that I want to attend. And so what do I do about that? I got to pick one. There's a couple ways to address that. They require you to make friends though. So the first is if you're attending as a group, it's a good idea over that first breakfast, sit down and talk about what sessions you're attending for the day and then divide and conquer, right? If 3 of your peers are going to the conference and you all find out you all want to go to the same session, consider whether you split up. Do you have to? No. There's nothing else interesting, and that's the most applicable thing. You can all attend it. But if there's other things of interest, split up, take notes, share back information, right? Use that to cover as much ground as possible. If you're going to a conference by yourself, all that great networking you did at the beginning helps make a conference friend who you can then have that same conversation with. And so a great thing when you're setting up the networking piece and you're trying to think about what am I wanting to get from this individual? What's the next step? What's the ask? Is establishing with that individual you make a conversation with and a connection with over the social. Hey, can we go to breakfast tomorrow and look at session guides? Maybe we can divide and conquer. We find things that are really interesting for each other, right? Make a conference buddy. If you don't have the ability to do those things, you don't have people attending with, you don't find that one person you can connect with early on, find out from the conference organizers, are they providing recordings or slides or some other way to follow up later? Typically they'll provide something. And so you can then scout out and see, these are the sessions I really missed and I wanted to attend. And so you can get them later, but also you can know who the presenter is and go have a conversation with them later and be like, I really wanted to attend your session. Unfortunately, there was another session that I really needed to attend elsewhere. Be open to talking a bit about your conversation, right? Make a professional connection there. Think a bit about that. Those are my tips on picking your sessions. With that, it brings us to Q&A. I'm finishing on time, but not a ton of time for questions. And so what I'll say here is thank you for attending, folks in person. Thank you for attending online. If you have questions, feel free to post them in the chat or ask them in the room. If you don't have any questions, that's okay too. And I appreciate your time and thank you for being here today. So from there, I'll open it up. What questions do we have? Yes, go ahead.
So in a research conference, like if there are experts from my field, so sometimes it feels like he definitely knows much better than me. And if after my session, if he has some questions that I do not know, I will feel embarrassed. And this nervousness works inside me, and this even debates my presentation. So do you have any tips how to conquer that? That's
a great one. So the question is essentially, you're attending a research conference and you know there are going to be folks there that have more experience than you in the field. And that creates some lack of confidence that you're not at that same level of expertise, right?
Yeah, I mean, if they had some questions that I could not answer at that event, so that's the thing.
Gotcha. So what I would tell you on that is acknowledging that we're all human beings and that no one knows everything. And even the folks that may have 10, 20, 30 years in your field do not know everything. And there'll be questions they may not know how to answer. Also, as younger researchers, you may have information they don't because you're more current, potentially because you're actively doing some more early research. And so you're talking about how you can conquer that mindset, right? Part of it is just acknowledging for yourself that acknowledge your own expertise, that you're a human being, that no one knows everything, and you may know things they don't. And so just engaging in what's called positive self-talk will help with that, right? I really strongly advocate for positive self-talk for a variety of things. Positive self-talk has been shown to be one of the most powerful indicators of success on tests. The only thing that is more impactful on your grade on a test is studying the material. Number two is positive self-talk. It's literally telling yourself before you go in, I am smart, I studied the material, I'm going to do well. You'll improve your grade telling yourself that versus going in, this sucks, this sucks, this sucks. The same thing is true as you go to this conference, right? If you tell yourself, like, I am smart, I've studied my material, I know my poster, I have expertise in this field, that will help calm the nerves. The other half of that is acknowledging as a person and a human being, you don't have to know everything. And if you get asked a question you don't know how to answer, acknowledging, say, that is a great question that I don't have an answer for right now. But I'd love to look more into that. Could I perhaps get your business card and we can find a way to connect on that? Right? Turn it into a networking opportunity. But being genuine and acknowledging that you may not have all the answers is not a failing. That is a strength. And when you approach it from that mindset, it can, again, help ease the anxiety, right? Now, if they ask a gotcha question in the middle of a session, you're still going to have some nerves, right? But taking a minute to steady yourself will really help. And again, if you attend an academic conference and a research conference as a graduate student, doctoral field, master, wherever you're at, experts in the field, unless they're total jerks, should be knowing and acknowledging you're a student who's developing. They should not be looking to try and make you look bad, right? And so again, assume positive intent from folks, and that'll help as well. Great question. Other questions? Yes.
Just to add to what
Sure.
you asked, at that point, if you don't know the question, if you don't know the answer, is it proper to give him the opportunity to provide the answer in the public, right? In front of everyone?
Potentially, but if they're asking the question, I wonder, do they have the answer? What I would do with that is, they're saying something to the effect of, that's a great question. They don't necessarily have the answer for right now. Do you have any more context you could add to the conversation about that? You open the door, and if they want to provide some information, they can, right? Be comfortable. Again, it's a dialogue, it's Q&A. Don't feel like it's a challenge, right? And so if they ask a question and they provide more information for the group, it doesn't lessen you, it just strengthens the group. So that's a good question, but how you phrase it, right? Because again, if they ask a question, you're like, I don't know. Do you know the answer? It's going to feel very differently then. That's a great question. I don't have an answer for that right now. Do you have more information and more context you could share with the group? It's going to feel like an invitation. That's a good question, though. Thank you. Other questions?